John Byers. I think when I saw these and heard, I thought, but I love that kid. And then there's another one with Mark Huffman. I love that kid. And Betsy, weirdo. I love that kid. It's just amazing. But John Byers touched me. So many touched my lives. And I think about Miss Florence Wyman. When you're new there, either she likes you or your life is not going to be great. So she knocked on my door one day, and it was the first group that I'd passed to her. And I went to the door, and she always had the handkerchief, and she'd do across the top of her lip. And I thought, oh, my word, what have I done? And she says, I want to tell you, Miss Ford, that's the best set of themes I ever got from my first time for my students. And turned around and walked off, and I thought, thank you, Lord, you have helped me so much. But she was. And then Miss Emma came one day and was talking about a little girl in the class, and she says, I don't know what's going to happen to her. And I says, what has happened? She says, she has her hair two-toned. And what she had done, she had had it frosted. Well, she was sure she's going to hell tomorrow. And but Miss Emma, she was an odd person. But when Miss Florence got really sick, I walked up and I said, now, Miss Florence, I'm going to take your hall duty for you. And she says, no. And I says, well, you can come back, but there'll be two of us standing there. So she didn't come back, and she wrote me a little note, and she said, everybody asks what to do, and you're the first person I've had that told me what to do. But Rufus Harris, I'll let Mark tell him what he did, and if you all want to tell it. But it was quite an experience with Rufus. And, of course, Philip Venable was like my son Joe. He was born an old man, and he stayed that way the whole time. He never changed. So when you had Mark, Rufus, and Philip, three of the most different people I have ever known that were such good friends and complimented each other. I think if I could have taken a little part from each one of them, we could have cloned it to the perfect young man. My second group that I had, because Marianne Dawday, I think, was the year ahead of you. So you were my second group that I'd ever had, because Marianne and them were the first themes that we had had. And but when Betsy read Emily, I don't know which class some of you were in, but Betsy had the talent, and she read it, and she had such a catch in her throat, and the tears just came down. And I just wondered when I talked to her if she could remember it, and she did. And it touched every girl there, and every boy had a choke in his throat too, but they couldn't admit it for anything.
Did you come up with that idea of 3 wishes? Did you do that every year, or was that
just for something
year?
To get them to think, to write? Because if it were such things that they didn't know about, then they couldn't write about it. And but that was a theme topic. So I kept a lot of things and finally got rid of them. I wish I'd have kept more of them, the papers.
Did it ever enter your mind at the time that you did things, just little things, that you were changing people's lives, that you were changing the outcome or putting them on a direction or a path?
Not really, Mark. I could never have been anything but a teacher. Nothing more, but nothing less. It was my life, and you all were my life. Now, when I was talking to one of my students in the back one time, there was nothing good. And I thought, he's had a terrible day, I'm sure, as he could ever have. And I looked at him, I thought, I've got to say something good about him. And I looked at him and I said, you really have pretty teeth. And from that day on, he was mine. But it's just so many that the kids, so many of them had a hard time. And I don't know. I just absolutely love them.
You had to hope that you were leading them in the right direction or making an impression, but I'm sure as a teacher, you don't always get that feedback maybe from the students. Certainly at the time, I'm guessing, what you saw today, you had a huge impact on an awful lot of those students, of those kids.
Times teaching school so many times. Well, I tell you, I had to quit going to one beauty shop because I had a couple of teachers come and all they did was talk about one kid, and I caught myself telling lies about how good he was, and I thought, I've got to get out of here, you know. But there was something good about all of them. You just look at them, and sometimes you had to search for it, but it's just good kids, just good. They made an impact on my life. Could never have done anything else. Never.
Yeah, you did on them. You certainly
Anything
did
you
on
wanna
them.
ask?
No, I'm just so glad you came.
Oh,
So lovely to
tonight
see
I
you.
would have cried looking at you. All would not have wanted me there. You'd have thought I was Betsy doing Emily. But it really touched me, and seeing the students is just, and what they've become. And of course, I could see it in on them. There was so much potential. Betsy's exactly what I thought she'd be. Mark, I really at times thought he might own the world. John Byers, there was just something about John that I always thought, what will he become? And when I heard him sing, I thought, well, there we are, right there. And Rufus, oh me, I don't know. Rufus was one of a kind, wasn't he something? And Philip Venable, and Mary Ann Smith, and Kay. Janet Duncan, when the group was up there dancing, they were selling the annual.
Yeah.
I worked with them and worked with them. Janet could not get the kick. So finally I said, honey, you just do your thing. She stole the show. She absolutely, and I was sitting there in the auditorium in the seat that no other school had seats at that time, and I said, hadn't she blossomed? And the guy beside me said, she sure has. But Janet, she was one of a kind of hers. And just people that you never think about when you'd see them there.
Now, did you say, were you the sponsor for the cheerleaders? Did you?
I was a cheerleader sponsor, and then I had this group together. We were trying to entice people to buy an annual, and they were up there dancing. And when I saw them, I'd forgotten about it. That was my group that I had taught to dance. And Mr. Barton, he contributed a lot to that school. And
Say that line again about the dashing home,
Oh.
like Carter said.
Mr. Barton came in my office one day, and he said, Mrs. Ford, I am going to dash home for a minute. Well, I got up and walked the hall, because if anybody'd seen Mr. Barton dash, that'd be a miracle. We'd pass each other in the hall in the morning, and I'd say, good morning, Mr. Barton, and I'd be down and turning the corner, and he'd say, good morning. I was already gone. He never got in a hurry, but he contributed so much. He caused my daughter to major in history, and she couldn't find a job anywhere. I never did appreciate that too much, so she turned into a counselor. But you all were exposed to many, many good teachers. You might not have realized at the time. Mrs. Spar, Joe Thomas, after he had Mrs. Spar, he came in and he says, you know, Mother, Mrs. Spar was the smartest teacher I've ever had. And I says, but I have you in class. And he says, Mrs. Spar is the smartest teacher I ever had in class. And but it was, of course, Rufus had the aunt there, Miss Miss Wooten. So he was at a disadvantage, because he knew if I didn't tell it on him, he was going to get it told on him. And, you know, Rufus did something to get things told on him, I guess. I would love to see him. And but so many of the girls, too, I looked and I thought, how cute. And the short dresses, my word. When we had the mini skirts, you had to get to school early that morning and write on the board, because when you raised your arms up, they were straight. Well, see, back then, you wore unusual undergarments, the girdle with the hook, the holes and everything. So you couldn't write on the board in any way when they were in class. And Steve Belote. We'd go home for lunch. We had an hour. And so we'd go home for lunch, and Steve, I dropped him off at home every day and picked him up. And when I picked him up in the morning, I could always tell when he had bacon and eggs, because I could smell it on him. Oh, my. I just think of all the people. And Kay Bell, what a cheerleader, turned out to, she taught forever also, too. Mary Ann Smith, wonderful. Anna, Kadra. Bobby Hall,
Yeah.
You go right down from where you live and turn on Brookfield, and I've got a little duplex back there that we're going to live in, so I'll get to see him maybe. I was thinking who else in there. So many thoughts come back in my mind.
I'm trying to think of the people that I saw today. I saw Jim Mitchell and Miller Slaughter and
Definitely. Jim
Jimmy
Mitchell.
and Jim Holloway.
Oh, Jim, loved Jim. Absolutely loved him. And Mitchell, when they moved, his mother and dad to Florida, I missed them. I was so crazy about his sister also. And good kids. Good.
Yeah.
When I saw them, it all came back in class. And it's so odd how I can remember where people sat. Betsy, you were in that front row on the 4th seat back, right by the window. Can remember. And I remember that Robert was in the 2nd row, about the 3rd seat back, and I thought I was going to have to put him up front because he turned out to be a pretty good student, but he didn't start out that way.
I sat in the sort of the center, and I sat behind John Byers, who sat in front of me. And the reason I remember that is that one day, my first name is John, and you asked me why I didn't go by John. And I said, I don't like the name John. And John Byers turned around and said, what don't you like about the name John? Just said it as deadpan as can be.
That he could. Oh, my word. Oh, gosh.
But it was just, we were lucky to live when we did and where we did.
That's exactly right. The kids today, they don't know they have missed something, but they really have. And like he said, lucky to live here. You don't know how many times that I left Mayfield High School going home and think people would pay to have my job. They just would. It was when you have a good day, that day after day after day, that you never got on a student. You had never had to call them down. People would pay to have a job like that. It's just, there's nothing.